what is hypnosis? Is hypnosis real? Usually when most people think of hypnosis, they think of some form of stage entertainment, where a performer will pick a volunteer from the audience, put them into a trance, and make them do some silly and ridiculous, embarrassing thing. And while there is a performance aspect to hypnosis, it's actually proving to be a real phenomenon. In fact, it's become increasingly useful to psychologists and neuroscientists, giving them new insights into mental processes and medically unexplained neurological disorders. Psychologists have started using hypnosis as a form of therapy to help patients with both physical and mental disorders. In fact, different meditation techniques and trance-like states have been used and documented for thousands of years. But history seems to point out that we would consider more modern-day hypnosis starting in the 1700s by a physician and mesmerist named Franz Anton Mesmer. Did I say his name right? Franz Anton? You can look it up. I think you can Google search that. Anyway, this is where the word mesmerize comes from. Mesmer had a theory about nature that he called animal magnetism, which is the belief that magnetic fluids flow through all living things. And he believed that to cure people, you just needed to tweak those magnetic fluids and adjust the flow. Unfortunately, because of his flashy and entertaining approach to healing his patients, and the scientific community discrediting animal magnetism by putting it to the test and not being able to achieve the same results, the theory of hypnosis or therapeutic trance-like states was shut down. It wasn't until the mid-1800s where mesmerism was actually put into scientific study as a potential therapy by a man named James Braid. This is where we got the word hypnosis. The Greek word hypnos, meaning sleep, because James Braid was looking at the trance-like state similar to sleeping. Now, through current scientific studies, psychologists and neuroscientists have come to find that hypnosis is actually a focused psychological state of attention that is similar but not the same as being asleep. Hypnosis is also a voluntary process, meaning people have to be willing to listen and take direction from the hypnotist in order to focus, relax, and enter what they call a trance-like state. This is why building rapport is so essential in the process. Without a strong rapport, the client might not reach his or her goal that they came to see the hypnotist for. This also dispels the idea that it's some form of mind control, since it depends heavily on a person willing to participate in the process. In the past, scientific studies of the effectiveness of hypnosis had to rely upon the verbal reports of those who had undergone hypnosis. In other words, the researchers relied upon the subjective account the person who had been hypnotized gave of his or her experience, which is not an ideal way of gathering scientific data. However, due to the great advances in technological innovation, scientific research into the effects of hypnosis can now make use of a completely objective method of investigation into this fascinating phenomenon, just by using brain scans to study how hypnosis affects brain activity. This is also known as neuroimaging. Neuroscientists have now been able to provide evidence that the subjective effects of hypnosis reported by the hypnotized person are objectively verifiable, strongly suggesting that the answer to the question, is hypnosis real, is becoming more of a definite yes. We now have the scientific evidence that shows that being hypnotized is not only possible, but that it might cause some real physical changes in the brain. Fascinating. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty fascinated. Brain scanning, or neuroimaging, has been used to study the effects of hypnosis in 3 main broad categories of experiments. A brief description of these categories would be scans of the brain at rest versus scans of the brain in the hypnotic state. Scans of activity in the brain caused by hypnotic suggestions compared to scans of brain activity in response to non-hypnotic suggestions. And lastly, scans of brain when a person carries out a task under hypnosis compared to scans of the brain when the person carries out the same task in a non-hypnotic state. There are also two main theories of what being hypnotized actually means psychologically. The first one is the altered state theory, which says that hypnosis actually leads to a distinct state of consciousness. Kind of like sleep, hypnosis might be a distinct state in the brain where your mental processes work differently and you're not necessarily aware of what's happening as if you were awake. The second one is the non-state theory, which says that hypnosis is more like role play. Instead of being a distinct state, hypnosis might be more of a combination of intense focus and certain expectations about what it means to be hypnotized. It also says that suggestibility can be modified with drugs or psychological procedures. It's not exactly clear what makes someone highly hypnotizable or not, but one study facilitated by Frank Galliard found evidence that it might have to do with slight variations in the brain's anatomy. In this study, researchers used magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI, and they found that the subjects who were more easily hypnotized had a significantly larger rostrum than those who weren't. The rostrum is the region in the brain involved with attention. Other scientists have looked at brainwave patterns of hypnotized people by using an electroencephalogram, or EEG might be a simpler way to say it. An EEG can monitor the electrical activity of your brain, showing different patterns of brainwaves. In this study, researchers found that hypnosis, especially in highly hypnotizable people, leads to an increase in the theta waves, which are linked to attention and visualization. MRIs and EEGs seem to show that hypnosis can have an effect on how our brains pay attention to things, which supports the idea of a state of focused relaxation. How does that focused relaxation let hypnotists make suggestions and slightly influence what their clients think or do? This has to do with a concept called top-down processing. According to Dr. David Spiegel, I like that name, Spiegel, a psychiatrist at Stanford who studies the clinical uses of hypnosis, consciousness, or what people see, hear, feel, and believe, is based on what neuroscientists called top-down processing. What you see is not always what you get, because what you see depends on a framework built by experience that stands ready to interpret the raw information. Our brains receive a lot of sensory information from the world around us. From there, we do a lot of processing and interpretation to figure out what's going on. Top-down processing is a cognitive process that initiates with our thoughts, which flow down to lower-level functions such as the senses. An example of this can be noted in a really cool show called Brain Games. In one of their experiments, they had people taste two different cakes, which were actually the same cake. One was marked for $15 and the other one was marked for $50. When the $15 cake was presented, the response was all negative. When the $55 cake was presented, the response was all positive. Because of the expectation of the $55 cake tasting better, this activated a pleasure processing part of the brain called the medial orbitofrontal cortex. Top-down processing also helps to explain the placebo effect. Another great example of top-down processing can be shown by what's called the Stroop test, which was done by Dr. Amir Raz, an assistant professor of clinical neuroscience at Columbia. In the Stroop test, subjects were asked to name aloud the ink color of printed words. The colors might be incongruent with the word, for example, the word red printed in green ink, or congruent with the word, for example, the word orange printed in orange ink. The difficulty in this task is that your brain is processing both the word and the color at the same time. Individuals are usually slower at naming the ink color of incongruent color words because of the automatic tendency to prioritize the reading of words over naming the ink color. This is a phenomenon known as Stroop interference. Dr. Raz, along with a team of neuroscientists, decided to use the Stroop test to see if hypnosis could affect how people perceive the words and their colors using a function. This was all done with an MRI scanner to monitor the brain activity. The researchers used relaxation techniques that hypnotize a mix of people who are highly hypnotizable and less hypnotizable. Without hypnotic suggestion, reaction times were longer in the incongruent condition than in the congruent or neutral conditions, but this Stroop effect disappears under hypnotic suggestion. Something even more amazing was that there were measurable differences in their brain activities. Specifically, a brain region responsible for decoding written words didn't become activated. This showed that their brains didn't seem to be recognizing words as actual words. At the same time, their brains didn't seem to register any conflict in the task, unlike the brains of participants who were resistant to hypnosis. From this test, it seemed like the hypnotic suggestion did change the subject's expectations, perceiving gibberish instead of words and causing them to easily focus on the colors. Those results appear in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Other studies done by neuroscientists have shown that hypnosis has the ability to both block and recover memories. Post-hypnotic amnesia is actually used for researching functional amnesia, like the kind caused by a traumatic brain injury. That all being said, researchers to this day are still going through the process of narrowing down a form of accurate testing for suggestibility, hypnotizability, and hypnotic suggestibility. Different scales have been used for testing subjects, and you can find more up-to-date research at this website. Now, because it is a highly subjective experience, the efficacy of hypnosis will primarily be dependent on the communication and rapport that the hypnotist creates with the client. It should be noted that hypnosis is not for everyone, and hypnosis is not a form of treatment or therapy in its own right, but it is used as an adjunct to other therapeutic approaches. Surgeons have now been using hypnosis before operations and medical treatments to reduce pain, anxiety, and help with the faster recovery. In medicine and health psychology, hypnosis has already been put into use effectively to reduce pain and discomfort associated with medical procedures such as childbirth, treatment of burns, and surgery where anesthesia cannot be used effectively. It is also used to treat chronic pain and psychosomatic problems and counter unhealthy habits that contribute to illness. In dentistry, hypnotic analgesia has been used as an effective alternative to topical anesthetic drugs. It also helps in the reduction of bleeding as well as the reduction of discomfort in oral surgery. It's even used to treat grinding and TMJ syndrome. So what is hypnosis exactly? Well, we have yet to come up with a concise definition as to what hypnosis really is, but a few quotes from modern-day hypnotists give a pretty good description of hypnosis. For example, Dave Ellman, an American hypnotist, states that hypnosis is the use of suggestion, whether direct or indirect, to induce a heightened state of suggestibility in which there is bias of the critical faculty of the mind and selective attention to suggestions given. British behavioral psychologist Hans Eysenck says that hypnosis is the ability of an individual to direct the full force of nervous energy into a small number of nervous channels, thereby reducing the synaptic resistance and facilitating the passage of the nervous energy. One of my favorite quotes is done by Michael D. Yapko, who is a clinical psychologist and author of 13 books based on the efficacy of hypnosis. And he says that hypnosis is a highly subjective experience that varies in quality from individual to individual. Currently, researchers are looking for more evidence on what it actually means to be hypnotized in a psychological sense. One thing is for sure. Hypnosis highlights how powerful our brains really are, and neuroscientists to this day are discovering new ways of proving what we have been calling a phenomenon all this time to actually be a reality. So is hypnosis real, and can it help you? I would say with the current evidence, yes it is, and if you allow it to, it can.